Jay Leno stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. It was a Tuesday night in 1998, and The Tonight Show was taping, as it always did. Packed audience, cameras rolling, scripted banter moving like clockwork. But then something happened that no producer had planned for, no script had accounted for, and no one in that building would ever forget. Jay Leno, the king of late-night television, the man who built an empire on consistency and charm, did something he had never done before. He stopped the show. Not for a commercial break. Not for a technical glitch. He stopped. Jay opened with a joke. Martin laughed and fired back with one of his own. The rhythm was perfect. The audience was engaged. Everything was going exactly as it should. But then, about 3 minutes in, Jay asked a simple question. So Martin, you've been doing this for 15 years. What keeps you going? Martin paused, just for a second, but it was enough. His smile wavered, his eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, the mask slipped. And Jay Leno saw it. Martin recovered quickly. He launched into a funny story about bombing at a bar mitzvah, and the audience laughed. But Jay wasn't laughing. He was watching, and he knew that something was wrong. Behind the scenes, the producers were happy. The segment was running smoothly. The clock was ticking down perfectly. But Jay Leno wasn't thinking about the clock. He was thinking about the man sitting across from him. And then, in the middle of Martin's next story, Jay did something no one expected. He stopped smiling. He stopped nodding. He stopped the show. Jay Leno leaned forward, put his hand on Martin's arm, and said, "Hold on. Stop for a second." The audience went silent. Martin froze. The cameras kept rolling, but no one knew what was happening. Even the producers in the control room were scrambling, asking each other what was going on. Jay looked directly at Martin and said, "Are you okay?" 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words, and the entire room shifted. Because in that moment, Jay Leno wasn't a host anymore. He wasn't playing a character. He was just a person asking another person if they were okay. Martin's face crumbled. His eyes filled with tears, and he tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "I'm fine, Jay. I'm fine." But Jay didn't let it go. He didn't move on to the next joke or the next segment. He stayed right there, his hand still on Martin's arm. And he said, "No, you're not. And that's okay. You don't have to be fine right now." The audience didn't know what to do. Some people clapped softly. Others just watched in stunned silence. This wasn't what they came for. This wasn't comedy, but it was something better. It was real. And then Martin broke. He covered his face with his hands and started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet, exhausted tears. The kind of tears that come when someone finally gives you permission to stop pretending. Jay Leno didn't panic. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He just sat there, his hand still on Martin's arm, and waited. After a moment, Martin looked up and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jay shook his head. "Don't apologize. Don't ever apologize for being human." And then Jay did something that no one saw coming. He stood up, walked around his desk, and sat down next to Martin. Not across from him. Next to him. Like a friend. Like a brother. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The producers were losing their minds. They had a schedule. They had commercial breaks. They had a script. But Jay Leno wasn't following the script anymore. He was following his instinct. And his instinct told him that this moment mattered more than anything else. Jay turned to the audience and said, "I want to tell you all something. This man right here, Martin Kellerman, has been doing stand-up comedy for 15 years. 15 years of late nights, bad crowds, and rooms that didn't care. And he kept going. Because that's what you do when you love something. You keep going, even when it's hard. Even when no one's watching. And tonight, we're all watching. And I want you to know that you're not alone, Martin. You're not alone." The audience erupted, not with polite applause, but with a standing ovation. People were crying. People were cheering. And Martin Kellerman, the comedian from Chicago who thought he was just going to do a 5-minute set, sat there in disbelief. But Jay wasn't done. He reached into his jacket pocket, a business card. He handed it to Martin and said, "This is my personal number. Not my agent's number. Not my assistant's number. My number. If you ever need to talk, if you ever need help, you call me." "Deal." Martin nodded, unable to speak. Jay looked at the camera and said, We're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, Martin's going to tell us a joke. Because that's what comedians do. They make us laugh, even when they're hurting. And that's beautiful. The show went to commercial, and in those few minutes, something extraordinary happened. The crew, the producers, the stagehands, everyone came over to Martin and hugged him. They told him they loved him. They told him he was brave. And for the first time in years, Martin Kellerman felt seen. When the show came back, Martin did tell a joke, and it killed. The audience laughed so hard that Jay had to wipe tears from his eyes. Not because the joke was the funniest thing he'd ever heard, but because he knew what it took for Martin to deliver it. After the taping, Jay walked Martin to his dressing room. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. But before Martin left, Jay gave him one more thing. His jacket. The same jacket Jay had worn on his very first Tonight Show appearance. He handed it to Martin and said, "This jacket's been through a lot. It's seen good nights and bad nights. But it always came back. Just like you will." Martin held that jacket like it was made of gold. And in a way it was. Because it wasn't just a jacket. It was a symbol. A reminder that even in the hardest moments, someone saw him. Someone cared. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. That night changed Martin Kellerman's career. Not because he became famous overnight, but because he finally believed he was worthy of the dream. He went on to tour the country, headline clubs, and eventually write a book about his journey. And in every interview, he told the story of the night Jay Leno stopped the show. But more than that, the moment changed Jay Leno. He had always been known as a great host, a great comedian. But after that night, people saw him differently. They saw his humanity, his willingness to break the rules when it mattered, his understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop and just be present with someone. Years later, in an interview, Jay was asked about that night. He said, "People think late-night television is about jokes and ratings and keeping the energy high. And it is. But it's also about connection. It's about reminding people that we're all in this together. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just stop and say, 'I see you.'" That's what I tried to do that night. I tried to see Martin, and I'm glad I did. The jacket Martin received that night is still in his home. He's never worn it again. He keeps it framed in his office, a reminder of the moment someone chose kindness over entertainment. And every time a young comedian asks him for advice, Martin tells them the same thing Jay told him that night. Don't ever apologize for being human. Because that's the legacy of that moment. Not a joke, not a punchline, but a reminder that the most powerful thing we can offer each other is our presence. Our willingness to stop, to listen, and to care. Jay Leno didn't just host a show that night. He created a moment that transcended television. A moment that reminded all of us that behind every smile, every joke, every performance, there's a person. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let that person be seen. That's the power of humanity. That's the power of Jay Leno. And that's the power of a moment when someone chooses to stop the show and just be human. Subscribe and share this story. Because the world needs more moments like this. Moments that remind us we're not alone. Moments that change everything. Weeks passed after that unforgettable night. The clip of Jay Leno stopping the show wasn't supposed to air. NBC's editors debated for days. Some thought it was too raw, too emotional for late-night television. Others argued it was exactly what audiences needed. A reminder that even under bright studio lights, real humanity could shine through. In the end, Jay made the call himself. "Air it," he said. "If we can make people laugh every night, we can let them feel something real once in a while." When the episode finally aired, it didn't just break ratings, it broke expectations. Viewers wrote thousands of letters, emails, and faxes. Some said they cried with Martin. Others said they finally felt understood. Mental health advocates praised Jay's compassion. Comedians who had struggled for years said they'd never felt so seen. But what no one knew was that, after the cameras stopped rolling that night, Jay stayed in the studio long after everyone left. The audience had gone home, the lights were dimmed, and the crew was cleaning up the stage. Jay sat alone at his desk, the same place he'd sat for over a decade, staring at the spot where Martin had been sitting. He wasn't thinking about ratings. He wasn't thinking about the headlines that would come. He was thinking about all the nights he'd interviewed people, smiled, laughed, moved to the next segment, and never asked, "Are you okay?" He realized that in a business built on timing, applause, and control, maybe the bravest thing anyone could do was to stop pretending to have all the answers. That thought stayed with him. It changed the way he hosted, the way he listened, the way he treated his guests. Over the next few years, guests would often tell producers that being on Jay's show felt different. They couldn't explain why. It was warmer, softer, more human. Even comedians, the ones used to hiding pain behind laughter, said that Jay's energy made them feel safe, that they could be vulnerable even for a few seconds and not be judged. One night, about 2 years later, Jay received a letter. It was from Martin Kellerman. He'd been touring small theaters across the country, doing shows again. The letter was handwritten, messy, and stained with coffee. "Jay," it began, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to tell you something. That night saved me. Not just my career. Me. You didn't just ask if I was okay. You made it okay to not be okay. I've been talking about mental health in my shows now. People come up to me after every gig and say, 'I saw that episode. That moment changed me. And every time, I think of you. I hope you know what you did matters.'" Jay kept that letter in the top drawer of his desk for years. Whenever he had a hard week, whenever he doubted whether the show still meant something, he'd open it and read it again. He later said in an interview, "Comedy is a strange thing. You spend your life trying to make people forget their problems. But sometimes the best thing you can do is remind them they're not alone in them." That philosophy began to define him. When new comedians came to The Tonight Show, Jay didn't just give them airtime. He gave them advice. He told them about the grind, the loneliness, the self-doubt. And he told them about Martin, not as a tragic story, but as proof that honesty had power. In private, Jay started funding small comedy workshops in Los Angeles for struggling performers. No cameras, no publicity. He'd quietly rent out small venues on Monday nights and let young comics perform, fail, and learn. The only rule he had was simple: be real. Be human. Years later, when Jay stepped down from The Tonight Show for the final time, Martin Kellerman was in the audience. Not as a guest, not as a celebrity, just as a friend. When the final applause faded and Jay walked off stage, Martin approached him. They didn't say much. Jay hugged him tight and whispered, "You made it." Martin smiled. "You did too." That photograph, Jay and Martin backstage, two men who once met under the glare of television lights, now older, quieter, and grateful, would later circulate online as a symbol of something rare in show business: authenticity. Because in an industry built on illusion, Jay Leno's decision to stop the show became one of the most genuine acts ever broadcast. A moment that said, we don't always have to perform. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just real. And decades later, when people talk about Jay Leno, they mention the cars, the jokes, the headlines, but they always come back to that night in 1998. The night he saw someone hurting, and instead of cutting to commercial, he cut through the silence. And maybe that's why, all these years later, people still remember it. Because in a world obsessed with moving faster, with keeping the show going, Jay Leno taught us something timeless. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stop performing, to stop pretending, and to simply ask, and mean it, "Are you okay?"